Welcome to the first in our new series, The Road to College. I'm Douglas Christiansen, Vice Provost for University Enrollment Affairs and Dean of Admissions here at Vanderbilt University. And I'm thrilled to be a part of this series. And I'm excited to spend some time speaking with our guest panelists today. They're the experts. I promise you, they're the experts. We put together this series specifically for Vanderbilt alumni who are now navigating the college search process and application process with their own children. The purpose is not to be specific to Vanderbilt, but rather all types of colleges. It's important to understand there are over 4,000 colleges and universities in the United States, from highly selective institutions to open enrollment. It's important also, I think, as we navigate this process, that there are so many options and opportunities. There is a seat for everybody to go to college. We have two panelists here. I'm thrilled and honored to be with them. And we have Tracy and Nikki, Tracy Rowan and Nikki Wilson. But Tracy, I wondered if I could start with you. And would you please share your memories, the good and the bad, of the year when your children are children, and you might intermingle here between different ones, when applying to college. At the beginning of their senior year in high school, what were you most concerned about as the parent? And what did you learn? Was that concern real or not real? And how maybe could you have looked at it differently, or did it work well? And let us hear that.
Okay. So I think for every parent, but myself, it's a 2-point question. Is one of my concerns was the stress of the process. A lot of these kids are, obviously very bright. They're very motivated, but they're surrounded by very bright and very motivated people. And so in our community, there's a lot of stress involved in the college application. There's a lot of stress coming from peers and parents. And so my whole goal during this was to keep that stress down. I did not want my kids thinking that they had to get into a certain school to please us. We kept reiterating that it was about them. Where did they want to go? What was important for them? Because it was different from when I was applying to school. They're applying to many more schools than we were doing when we were going through the process. Excuse me. So the stress, but B, also supporting them. Want to make sure that they knew that we were here no matter what. We didn't have expectations of a certain school. Our expectations were, we want you to go to a school where it's going to make you happy. And so we kept reiterating that. And one of the things that I would tell parents is, you really have to be the role model in this. The kids are getting a lot of information and a lot of peer pressure from their friends and their school, and they may not discuss it. And that's something that I didn't realize until after the process was over with my oldest son, my first son, who went through. He seemed to be handling it really well. And so I was like, okay, it seems like he's not getting this peer pressure that I was concerned about. And then when it was all over, papers were signed, checks were signed. He told me that there had been a lot of pressure, that his friends, there was a constant, where are you going? What are you doing? And so we had worked really hard to keep that out of our house. We didn't ask where their friends were applying. We didn't, I didn't ask my friends where their kids were applying. We really focused on them, their decisions, and hey, we're really happy where you go, because you're going to end up where you were meant to be.
I think, Tracy, that is a fabulous response. And I love the sense where you talked about how to bring down the anxiety level. And maybe that brings me, Nikki, to your question, or to a question I have for you is, as your children went through their process and the application process, how did they narrow their list? How did they start to think about, there's this many, how do I go to this to know where they're going to apply? Any tips you could give from your experience?
Yes. And I just have to say, Tracy, very impressed with the way you handled the whole admission process. That's incredible advice that you just gave. I would have liked to have had that advice, 8 years ago. I did like how you said that your husband took your kids on a tour of colleges, and we sort of did the same thing. And I know that's not an option for everyone, but if it is, I highly encourage it. We started as early as 9th grade. Basically, any vacation that we went on, we turned it into a college tour. We even did a 3 weeks up the East Coast. My daughter had some basketball tournaments, and we turned it into a whole college tour of the whole East Coast. First time we ever went to Nashville, Christmas break, we're going to see Vanderbilt, you know?
All right.
So, anytime you can do that, that is certainly very helpful. And Maddie and Cole both built their list of schools with specific majors in mind. That's not everyone knows the major they want, but maybe they have some sort of idea. So even though Maddie really liked the idea of a small school, many did not have engineering programs. And so they were instead focused on liberal arts. So that sort of took those off the table for her. But she also knew she didn't want to be in an engineering centric school. So she didn't want to go to a Georgia Tech or maybe some of the other, an MIT she wasn't interested in, that were in her mind too focused on engineering. Hence her art history minor. And my son really wanted to apply to larger schools with strong business programs. Like he knew that when he was building his list, those were 2 things that were very important to him. So academic offerings, the size of the school were probably the 2 most important factors. But location was also key. That came down, he wanted to be somewhere warm. When he got to looking at, say, do I want to go to Ross in Michigan, or do I want to be at USC? The son of USC in Los Angeles drew him. Easy in and out, easy to fly, easy for the family to get there and visit. And my daughter was originally, once we were doing these tours, interested in a real small school in a small town, and slightly smaller than Vanderbilt. And after, I call it the 3 visit rule, we went there because she was planning on going early decision there, went 3 times. And by the 3rd time, she realized that we'd already exhausted all the restaurants, all the things to do in this one little town, that she said, you know what, that's not going to be for me for 4 years. So, and you saw more weather, different types of weather. And, but the 3rd visit to Vanderbilt, she still loved it. So she did end up going early decision. So I think that, the location is also an important decision.
Well, and I really like, Nikki, as you think about whether I can visit 3 times, what investigation or research can I do?
Mm-hmm.
What can I learn more about, not just the school, but I really enjoyed your comment about the town or the city. And clearly visiting is the very best, but what can I see on videos online if I can't visit? But it's more than kind of just a one-time thing. You're building into a process. So I really like that. Tracy, as I think about this and kind of the application process and the search process, but more specific to the application, what resources do you remember that were helpful that the colleges helped you with?
The colleges. Okay. It's interesting, when we were going through it, you did your college visit and you had your interview, and now that's not the case. So
Right.
What the colleges are doing now, I think that made an impact, was coming to the high schools. My oldest son at Northeastern, brought Northeastern home after a high school college night because of their co-op program, which I had never heard of. And he came home so excited about it. He was like, oh my gosh, there's this school, Mom, and it has this co-op program, and it sounds amazing. And so the kids, that's kind of their first touch point, is the schools coming to their high school and talking, or, meeting with the kids and saying, hey, we have this. Hey, my son who's at IU Bloomington, the 2 main reasons he chose the school was it has, like you, Nikki, like your child wanted to be in an undergrad school of business. That kind of there was, okay, that takes out those schools. So that was super important, that he got into an undergrad school of business. But the flip side to it was that he wanted that school spirit. He wanted those football games, those basketball games. He wanted to go and cheer and be a part of that. That is so much his human spirit. He loves that. And so where I thought, oh, a smaller school would be good for you, he was like, Mom, I'm going big. And he does. He loves it. We were just there. We went to the football game. And that again narrowed it down. But the colleges and universities coming to the high schools is really their first experience in meeting admissions counselors and college counselors and that kind of thing. And hearing what they have to say, the pictures, the brochures, that kind of thing. Talk, their hot points. Hi, we have, a D1 basketball team. Do you love to cheer? Hi, we have a business school, an undergrad business school. And so I felt that that's really what the colleges and universities, that's their first touch point to kind of get these kids involved and engaged, is get out to their schools, talk to them, engage them.
Nothing what I ever say was great about the pandemic, but one thing the pandemic did for the college search process is it made admissions offices being much more responsive to new ways of disseminating information.
Absolutely.
And instead of it's just like, here's the standard presentation, and here's take the walking tour online of the campus.
Right.
It was much more specific about learn about this program or this program.
Right.
It also was
business. Yeah. Sorry.
Right. And it was also opened so students that maybe didn't have the financial wherewithal to travel multiple times, or international students, or really students that were further away. We were much more responsive than kind of just the standard one size presentation. We had to get more specific. And I think that's been a real benefit in the search process. Nikki, I'm going to come to you, kind of a crazy question that I love always to ask parents. And how did you feel about the essay process? How were you involved, not involved? What tips do you have for parents about the universities that require an essay? What tips do you have, not as much about writing the essay, but how did you work with your children on their essays?
We encouraged Maddie and Cole to get started early, of course. Particularly, I was not like Tracy, and I was a little bit more of a maybe anxiety inducing in my firstborn.
I was.
And I feel really bad about that. But, I was like really on him, and those poor kids, he applied to a lot of schools and he had a lot of essays, and it's a lot. So I probably asked a few too many times about them, but I did encourage them to get started early so they'd have plenty of time to think about, you need to write, you need to proof, you need to be able to edit it. You're having counselors read them. My students, neither of them wanted me or my husband to reid their essays. So
absolutely,
they're only 13 months apart. We went through this process sort of back to back, basically. And they're very personal to them. So I didn't have a problem with that. We supported them. We were sounding boards as far as ideas. They could bounce those off of us. And we did help them if they might say, okay, here's the question that we have for this school. And they might bounce ideas off of us. But they controlled the process themselves, which I think is important. They had counselors that we're reading them and giving them feedback. But it's their personality that has to be showcased in these essays, and it needs to be their voice. I'm going to be honest. I've been a reader for friends' children before, and where it was real obvious that the parents had written large chunks, because even you can see the transition of voice within the essay. And that would be what I would say back to my friends, you got to let him own it. I can tell that you wrote, part of this. If I'm reading 3 and one has a completely different voice than the other one. So I think that's key, is letting them really just, don't think too much about what they think they should be writing, and just really write from the heart and own it themselves.
And I think that, do you both want a job? You could come and work in the admissions office here and go around the country explaining this. But it is so important that, again, the 33 years or so I've been doing this, and I say this in a way that I hope won't come across in an egotistical way, because I don't mean it that way at all. But my guess is I could probably tell you 96.7% of the time if the student wrote it, or if the parent or someone else wrote it.
Yep.
Because you don't see typically an essay written at this level, that's the maturity and experience of a 40 or a 50-year-old person to an 18-year-old, and things just come through. After you've read so many, you can start to see that. And to me, why an essay is so important, it's so we get to know the student, no question. But if the student is telling us, or we're interpreting that the student is somebody that they're not, that's a big risk if it's not going to be a good fit. Tracy, is looking back, we can always look back. We always think about, looking back helps us in the future, but did the going through the application process and writing and thinking and answering their questions help them go, this is kind of where I'd like to be, or I'm starting to think maybe this isn't quite the place I want to be?
I think in certain instances it did, and that would come from the essay prompts.
Okay.
These kids are applying to so many more colleges than we ever did. And so once they started reviewing everybody's essay prompts and seeing what they were going for, they started to question, oh, no, what kind of kid did they really want? Is that the group of friends that I want, if this is what they're trying to call from? So I think that they looked at those essays, and I know for one of my sons, there was one school, he got the essay list and he brought it to me and he said, I want you to look at this. And we reviewed it together, and it was kind of a sigh, like, oh, okay. And so I said, well, why don't you outline something and see just what comes out, right? See if something just kind of comes out of your head, and maybe you could think about this and that. And so he spent a night, again, doing an outline. And over the next couple of nights, he's like, no, it's not going to work. And I was like, okay. He's like, those questions, they don't bring out who I am, I think, was what he was so frustrated with.
This is just fabulous advice from both of you, but that your son could listen to his inner self and know this isn't where I'm headed. As Nikki, as we kind of finish up here, one question I might ask you is, if you had to do something over, or what might have you done differently, if anything at all?
Well, I'm going to go back to Tracy's first response and how impressed I was that even in her first student, she already had the wherewithal to, not focus too much attention on the whole process. And we admittedly spent too much time talking about it. We could have discussed it less. We could have not added to the already high level of, emotion, anxiety that's attached to the whole process. I do think he was like fairly laid back about all of it, luckily, but it just ended up being me nagging, right? And I would have, I definitely learned, tried not to do that at all with Maddie. She benefited from me learning that lesson early on, but I really like what she said too about don't even ask the friends. I mean, because it becomes like everyone's talking about it. That's all they talk about. And these poor kids are so sick of being asked by every single parent about college,
Yeah.
and that would be my number one, that if anyone took any advice out of this video, like take that advice. And I really liked that she said that she didn't even tell anyone, where, I mean, if we all could start doing that, and just not even mention it, like they don't know yet, they haven't decided, like just be coy about it and move on, avoid conversations and just don't discuss it, and talk about other great things about their senior year that are super exciting and fun.
The other thing I would love to leave, and I think you've shared this very well, is really in this whole process, it's the student's decision, but it is a family conversation. And those are things to think about, that the student needs to decide. And both of you said that so well, that let the student own it and decide. That will be all the research shows. If they have vestiture in where they're going and how they've decided, they will do better at that institution and they will grab hold better. I really appreciate your openness, and thank you so much for spending the last 15 or 20 minutes with us. And I really appreciate your time and wish you the very best and wish your children the very best as they go through this finish the college now that they're all in college, and wish them the very best. So have a great day.
Thank you, Doug.
Thank you. You too.